nothing really lasts forever, you know? At the end of the day, it just happens. Everything falls. Rome fell, Chinese fell multiple times, in fact. So it's only logical that at some point Games Workshop will go down the bad path. And they did with this leak of the new Custodes. And they have this short story that they stealthily put in, about the female Custodes. And there are arguments to be made why those shouldn't exist. I guess first of all, and the most important one is to understand that the Sisters of Silence are a thing, and they work perfectly in a green Oni, orange Oni kind of trope for Talons of the Emperor. They work together very well, and there's really no point in breaking that. If it's not broken, don't fix it. And the story isn't anything to write home about. It's just kind of bad overall and not that good. But then again, Games Workshop and Warhammer is filled with those kind of stories. The problem is that it's been put so stealthily in to just break everything. And again, unfortunately, it kind of diminishes the roles and contribution of the Sisters of Silence, who deserve more lore, who deserve more miniatures, in fact, as well. But we can't really have that. No, we can't have that. We need to have the male faction have females in it, because at the end of the day, that's what's important. It's not already boosting and giving love to the female-only faction, but destroying the male one. Because at the end of the day, all these actions are made out of wickedness. But let's leave that aside for now and probably forever, because that's not what matters. Somebody asked Games Workshop, or the Warhammer community official whatever thing on X, formerly known as Twitter, why did they make female Custodes? And that's a pretty good question, especially when you look at how stealthily they've been inserted. And Warhammer responded with, I quote, "Since the first 10,000 were created, there have always been female custodians." And this quote is a slap in the face, not only for the Sisters of Battle, but for everybody that likes Warhammer in general, because this is pure revisionism. It's not a situation like you have with the squads in the League of Wotan, where the squads were sidelined, ignored for the most part, and then there comes with extra lore. And it's always been like that, a little bit here and there, especially for the League of Wotan. But this creates an interesting dynamic and situation where they're trying to rewrite history. Imagine, if you will, you have 50, 60, a bunch of Horus Heresy books, novels, and stories. Over 100 of them in total when it comes to stories. And there has been no female custodian once. No female Custodes. And the story is interesting because it can be interpreted as a mistake. It can't be, oh, she's in fact the Sister of Silence, because they kind of defeat that with her speaking. There's no Sister of Silence if she speaks, or if she takes part in the blood games. So what we're dealing with now is pure revisionism. And we've seen that happen quite a lot in history. History has been changed quite drastically by the day. Words have lost their definition overnight. So something like this isn't that surprising. It's awful, though, that it comes from Games Workshop. But then again, we have to understand that Games Workshop, in making bad decisions, well, that kind of goes hand in hand. Like the horse and carriage, if you want. But before we had this confirmation from Games Workshop saying Oceania was always at war with East Asia or Eurasia, we had something else that was interesting, and that was people complaining that the Adeptus Custodes were nerfed, and people rightfully complained about it. The only issue is that the community manager that takes care of the Warhammer official page started blocking people because of that. And as I've said, Games Workshop and bad decisions go hand in hand. You can ask the local gentry and they will say it's elementary. All these actions shouldn't really come as a surprise, because at the end of the day, when we look at the investors into Games Workshop, we can see that you have JP Morgan Asset Management, which I looked up on Google and has like 1 star. And then you also have the notorious BlackRock and Vanguard, the same companies that are very willing to give money to other companies to diversify many aspects of a certain franchise, and they don't need to make that much money when it comes to that franchise or IP, because at the end of the day, BlackRock pays for it. Well, the funds for this have been going down, as we've learned many times, but still, it's not dying out, and it's quite unfortunate to see Games Workshop fall. And here I was thinking that Games Workshop, being conservative with this decision and caring more about money, will try to avoid making any bad decisions. But then again, we have to consider this is the company that gave us the Word of the Beast, ended it abruptly, and then gave us the death of Warhammer Fantasy, the birth of Age of Sigmar, and Primaris. So it only makes logical sense that they would destroy their own lore and pretend it never really happened, because I have to reiterate this, Games Workshop and bad decisions go hand in hand. Try your best to separate them, but you'll find out it's just an illusion. Again, try, and you will come to the same conclusion. Now, I wish I could have some better quips about this, talk more at length about what's happening and how to reverse course, but I don't think I know anything in this case. It's pretty big of a change. You might consider it in a way a weird method of trying to get rid of everybody complaining about female space marines by giving them something instead, by sacrificing two factions, in this case both the Adeptus Custodes and the Sisters of Silence, to the woke altar. But this does not explain the revisionism of saying they always existed, while the truth is that they never did. They were never really a thing. They didn't happen. And Games Workshop coming and say they always did, well, does not really bode for good news in the future. Because you have to understand, you give an inch, you give a mile, you give a finger, and they'll take your whole hand. It is tragic to see Games Workshop go the same route that Star Wars and Doctor Who and many others have went down on. And it's probably clear after seeing how the Fallout show is turning out that the 40k show isn't going to be that promising. But the question is Games Workshop only basing everything on the hope that more normies will come in and turn this niche hobby, that is Warhammer, into something bigger, something grander? Well, it's a risky maneuver, I have to be honest with you. It's not something I would do. But at the end of the day, it was bound to happen eventually. With BlackRock and Vanguard as your primary investors, with the biggest ones, it only makes sense that this will happen eventually. And I think we should expect female space marines in the future too. Not because I want it, but because the signs, well, times they are changing. You can look at Bretonnian Knights and how they've turned a bunch of them into women, much in the same way that they probably try to copy Fire Emblem with this whole shtick of having female flyers. We can look at even the end in the Death Part 3, the end of the Horus Heresy, where Horus promises the Emperor that if he joins him, he will rule over sons and daughters, both Primarchs. So, I have to say, it was inevitable, but in the end, not that surprising. I guess I'll just have to spend my money on companies that care about what they're doing and are not invested by Vanguard or BlackRock. It's still quite tragic and something that many people, myself included, didn't really wish to happen or wanted to see it happen, and some of us probably even hope that it will never happen. And yet, the unfortunate news is that it did. Como sucede todo.